Hey everybody! So today we're going to be talking about Jupiter. Here is the card for it. And Jupiter is considered like the great benefic of all the planets. It is a very benefic planet, right? But I feel like there's this idea that people sometimes have that it's always a beneficial planet. And while that is generally the case, generally Jupiter does function as a benefic. I wouldn't take that and completely run with it. Jupiter can have its downsides, and Jupiter can be a nasty little fucker in your chart. It can be. I feel like sometimes people forget that. So I do feel like it needs to be said. That it can function that way. That we need not forget that it can function that way. But to start out, Jupiter is the planetary ruler of Sagittarius. If you use traditional rulership, it is also the planetary ruler of Pisces. Or you can use both and, have Neptune and Jupiter ruling Pisces. However you want to do it, whatever. It is considered exalted in Cancer, meaning Jupiter is at home or domicile in Sagittarius and in Pisces. It is at its highest strength, its highest functioning, if you will, in Cancer. On the opposite end, you have it in fall in Capricorn. Meaning this is probably the sign that Jupiter functions in the hardest. It has the hardest time functioning. And let's think about that. The Capricorn energy is a little bit more. It's a little bit more structured, a little bit more. It's mature. It's more mature. It's more. It can be restrictive, and Jupiter is expansion and doesn't necessarily function all that well or that easily under those conditions. Then it's also in detriment in Gemini because Gemini is opposite Sagittarius. It also has a difficult time functioning in Gemini as well. A lot of that has to do with, the focus of Gemini. Gemini is more, at least Gemini as more like bringing the lens in and focusing on more daily things, whereas Jupiter wants to expand on everything. So it doesn't always function as well in Gemini. It can also expand. It tends to also expand on some of Gemini's. Or I've noticed this, not universal. I've noticed this though, that it'll expand on some Gemini's more difficult traits or challenging traits, like fidgetiness or any sort of restlessness, any sort of anxiety. It tends to expand on those in when it's in Gemini. Not always, but I do see it happen. So Jupiter is okay. So while we have Mercury, right? Mercury is like taking in information and communicating and things like that. Jupiter deals with the assimilation of how we process that information. How we go about doing that is a Jupiter thing. Being able to assimilate and make that information our own, inform our own philosophies and abstract ideas around that information that we've taken in. That is a Jupiter thing. Jupiter is also, I mentioned it before, Jupiter is expansive, right? Jupiter wants to expand. It doesn't want to be fenced in. It doesn't want to be held back. That's not a bad thing at all on its own. Depending on what it's doing in your chart, expansion may or may not always be a great thing. It depends on what Jupiter is doing in your chart. Like, for instance, let's say you've got Jupiter conjunct the moon. You might be looking at somebody who has expansive emotions, like their emotions are expanded upon. That's not always a bad thing at all. It depends on what else is going on, but it could be. It could cause the emotions to end up all over the place or expanding too much, too far. It could function that way. Again, not universal. But yeah, by sign, it'll show how you expand. And by house, it'll show where and what areas of life perhaps you expand the most into, the ones that you're most like drawn to expand. It's also, when I think of Jupiter, something that automatically comes to mind is cornucopia or the horn of plenty. Because it's just, to me, that is like a great mental representation of what Jupiter is. Abundance is definitely a Jupiter thing. Something that Jupiter wants to express. Impossibilities. Things that are possible. Understanding, I kind of mentioned that before with the assimilation of information in your mind. It does this to understand. So that's definitely at a higher, understand at a higher level, in a higher way, right? It is luck. I've seen a lot of posts on different forums and things like that about how am I lucky? How do I find my luck? How can I be more lucky? Things like that. Luck is definitely a Jupiter thing. Depending on, the aspects that it makes in the chart, you might find that you have better luck or maybe worse luck. Depends on what's going on. Somebody would say, and this again is not universal, because there are probably some people with Jupiter and Cancer that feel like they are unlucky as fuck, but Jupiter and Cancer might, because it's exalted there, it might function a little bit, it might be luckier than, say, somebody with Jupiter and Cancer might feel like they have better luck than somebody that, say, has Jupiter and Capricorn. But again, that's not universal. There is optimism here with Jupiter. Sometimes this can be blind optimism. I mean, and optimism is not a bad thing. Okay, I will say I'm very sometimes I feel like I'm when it comes to because I do have Saturn rising, so I'm pretty realistic, right? And Jupiter is not, it's not that it's not realistic, but it can be like blindly optimistic. And there's nothing wrong with optimism. Blind optimism should probably be kept in check, because there does come Jupiter is not the planet to admit that they're fucked when they're fucked. They're not. And sometimes people have to be, sometimes you're just fucked, and you've got to face that. So there can be a blind optimistic quality with Jupiter that probably should be kept in check, not done away with, but just kept in check to make sure that it, you're not more fucked than you are thinking you are in any given situation. Optimism is helpful. Blind optimism is not. generally, in my experience anyway. It's also truth and beliefs. And even if Jupiter is not in like a personal house, one of the houses that's more personal in nature, like the first house, for instance, or the fourth, or there is a notion of seeking personal truth with Jupiter. Jupiter definitely wants to express this. How it's expressed, obviously, by sign and where, what area of life their house, by the house that it falls. But it is definitely truth and beliefs and figuring what those are for you. That is definitely a Jupiter thing. One more thing, because it is a very generous planet. Jupiter is generous. Sometimes it can overextend. Sometimes it can overindulge. Sometimes it can overpromise. So that's not universal for everybody, but it is probably something that if you feel like you are somebody who maybe overpromises things or overextends yourself too much, perhaps even overextend your capabilities, what you're capable of. Not that we're not all capable of anything we want, but in that moment, overextending yourself, and what you can do, that is probably something that you'd want to look at Jupiter in your chart for. See if perhaps that fits there. I found that to be the case quite often for people that feel like they do that or have issues with doing that. So yeah, I think I'm looking at the card. I think knowledge and wisdom, definitely, but that also goes along with understanding. Those kind of go hand in hand a little bit. But yeah, I feel like that's pretty good. I think I hit on most everything that I wanted to hit on. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can find us on Instagram at Let's Fuck With Astrology. I am at Saturn Season Astrology on Instagram. Natalie is at Abaturno Astrology on Instagram. If you're watching this on Instagram, you can find us on YouTube searching for Let's Fuck With Astrology. If you do the Reddit thing, you can go to the subreddit Let's Fuck With Astrology or type in r/Let's Fuck With Astrology into Google or whatever. And if you're interested in the star cards, you can go to the link below. I think before I was not adding the dash like an idiot when I was saying the address. So it's letsfuckwithastrology.com/star-cards. Yeah, I was saying that wrong the whole fucking time. Anyway, I'll see y'all later.